Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar today. Our topic today is covering security gaps with outsourced endpoint detection and response. We plan to have this presentation go about 45 minutes. We'll leave time for questions at the end. If you have questions during the talk, please send them through the GoToWebinar console, which you should see on your right side of your screen. Without further ado, who's talking to you today? Myself, I'm Chris Rothe. I'm the CTO of Red Canary. We're about 3 years old as a business. We do detection and response for about 100 businesses today. We use Carbon Black as our endpoint sensor and really partnered with them, honestly, since before we were a company, before we were in business. So long-time users, big fans. We're also one of the initial companies providing what's called managed detection and response, and we'll talk a bit about that later, so hold for that. I'm joined by Rick McElroy from Carbon Black. Rick, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Rick McElroy, security strategist for Carbon Black. In a former life, I was a CISO, actually, in my last role. So happy to be here today discussing, Carbon Black and the enablement of teams and partners to go after endpoint detection and response. So we're the market leader. We have 2,000 plus customers, and we're #1 in incident response. And I'm really looking forward to today's session. So hopefully you guys have some great takeaways.
All right, thanks, Rick. Like I said, if you guys have questions, fire away, and we'll answer them as we go, and then pile up a few for the end. All right, so let's start about the agenda for today's talk and kind of the TLDR. We're going to talk about endpoint detection and response, EDR, and what it really is and what it really isn't. Specifically, in my view and Red Canary's view, EDR is a discipline or a capability of your security program. It's not a tool that you buy, right? Obviously, you need tools to put it into practice, but it's not something you buy off the shelf. Really, the promise of EDR is that it can detect attacks that are bypassing your prevention measures, so you don't end up with attackers lingering on endpoints for the token Verizon report 250 days, right? That's the goal. And that's the promise, but it can be a little bit difficult to get there. So as an organization, to get to EDR and get that implemented in your security program, you really have 3 main paths. You can build it yourself, of course, which may require a lot of effort and potentially a fairly large team. You could use a managed detection and response vendor, and again, we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Or you can use an MSSP for at least a little bit of it. We know MSSPs have kind of traditionally been focused on compliance and device management, but there are some pieces that they might be able to help with on the EDR front. That's what we're going to talk about today. We'll move forward here. By now, you should all be very well versed on EDR and that you need it, right? Because all of the vendors are out there shouting at you about how much you need it, right? That's why kind of big font, capitalized, bang, bang, bang. The attackers are trying to get at the data on your endpoints. All prevention fails, we know eventually, and even if a very small percentage of threats get by your prevention capabilities, it can be a really bad day, right? And so EDR really combines visibility, detection, and response across all of your endpoints. Really think of it as a layer of security for when your other prevention tools fail. So again, visibility, detection, and response, kind of the key tenets of EDR. But the marketing in this space has kind of really gotten kind of ridiculous. I literally was at a conference last week. One of the vendors' booths, the big stand-up behind their booth, had the tagline, "Powered by math." Kind of ridiculous. Machine learning is all the rage right now. Artificial intelligence is going to kind of save our souls. Or maybe it's just that we need next gen of everything because everything next gen is inherently better. Bottom line, it's kind of silly. It's over the top, and we need to kind of hone in on what we're really after here. For the record, this is just a sandbox I'm going to go off on for a minute. If someone's trying to sell you math or machine learning as key features of their product, you probably should just laugh them out of the room. And don't take me the wrong way. I love math. Without it, we'd all just be sitting here using letters, and no one would know how to split a check or do anything useful along those lines. I also love machine learning. It's an incredibly powerful technique. We use it a lot. It helps with analyzing data, doing predictive analytics. Very important piece of technology and tactics. We use a lot of math and machine learning at Red Canary, but I can tell you kind of unequivocally that if we start highlighting our use of math in our marketing materials, I'm going to single-handedly burn down our marketing department and start over. So bottom line, when you're looking at these products, ignore their implementation methods like math, machine learning, AI. Focus on the results that their products deliver. Right? And that's kind of the end of my soapbox. Rick, do you have anything you'd like to add at kind of this upfront intro section?
Yeah, I mean, I think our view over on the CB, right, is man and machine, because it's about the process and the people. The technology really just enables the capabilities to get there. So just keep that in mind.
All right, thanks, Rick. So we poked a little bit of fun at the overzealous marketing by the EDR vendors. Now let's get a little bit more serious and talk about what EDR really is, right? So I mentioned before, EDR is really a discipline or capability of your security program. As mentioned before, the goal is to detect what got past our prevention tools and our network-based detection tools and respond to it before we end up in the New York Times, right? Unfortunately, that's not a tool you can buy off the shelf, and EDR isn't a vendor either. Certainly, there are tools that can help make it possible, but you can't buy a product and just set it and forget it. There's no Ron Popeil magic. And why is that? The answer is because to do it well, you need to cast a really wide net, right? If we want full detection coverage, we have to accept that our detection capabilities are going to alert us to a lot of legitimate behavior that looks like bad behavior. For instance, Joe in IT mounting a network share, probably not an issue, right? It's part of his day-to-day activity. But if all of a sudden Joe's mounting shares at 2 in the morning when we know he's asleep and he's never online, it may be an indication that somebody's stolen his credentials. And if we're not looking for all mounting of network shares and analyzing that, we're potentially missing things. We also need to continuously improve, and EDR is never complete. It's never an out-of-the-box capability. So in other words, to do this well, we need access to researchers who are researching and adapting our detection techniques to match innovation in the tactics by our attackers. Remember, the attackers are working every day to attack your systems, and we really have to work harder to defend them. So just bottom line, the dirty little secret of EDR, you can buy all the tools under the sun, but you have to provide the resources, as Rick said, man and machine, to get the value out of the product, to make it go beyond just being kind of a black box recorder. All right, so now we kind of know what EDR is, what its purpose is, and we know it encompasses technology plus the people and processes to really make it work and make it thrive. But how do we get it, right? How do we add this discipline capability into our security program? And really there are 3 paths that we look at that you could take, and they're not all entirely mutually exclusive. The first, obviously, you can build it internally. You can build out the capabilities. We'll talk about what that takes in a little bit. You can use an MSSP for some or all of this capability. Talk about why that may or may not be a good decision. Or you could look to a managed detection and response provider, right? This is a new term, and we're going to talk about in a minute what exactly managed detection and response is. Before that, Rick, in your past life as a CISO, curious how you approach a decision like this in terms of building internally or doing some outsourcing, and kind of how you approach that decision, what advice you might have for the folks listening.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have choices, right? And you know, those choices are limited by constraints in your program. The constraints might be the number of people that you have today, the budget that you have, the technology that you have in place. So really thinking out a strategy around what you're going to do for endpoint detection and response, which leads you down decision paths, right? And one of the ones I often talk about is, do I build the capability internally and choose to be really great at that, or do I choose to partner with someone who's really great at that already? So sort of looking at EDR, as you're building a program, you might be at maturity 0 or maturity 1 in that program, and looking to partners, you might be able to leapfrog 3 years of hard effort and building a staff and actually staffing and putting process in place and all of this stuff, while you have other more important things that your staff should probably be doing at that point. So I think looking at MSSPs as a way to make sure your staff isn't burdened with the management of your infrastructure, that's a nice path, right? Because it gives your team time back. They're not spending the time administrating the systems, doing the care and feeding. And then you can look to grow those capabilities internally over time, and then it becomes a cost decision. Right? If it's cheaper to pay a partner who's really good at it, awesome. If it's cheaper to go build your practice and go down the road of being highly capable at that stuff, great. Look to do that. But I think sitting down and putting a thoughtful strategy around what your teams are going to be really good at and what they're going to excel at, and then find partners who are great at the rest of it, right? So those are just things that I like to look at when I'm building a capability in a security program.
Excellent, thanks, Rick. So we'll jump ahead. I've mentioned this a couple times, just we'll take a quick divergence just to define kind of what this new market term that I've said a couple times is, right? What is managed detection and response? It's a new segment that Gartner is defining. You can read some of the words here, but the gist is that the focus of MDR is to detect those threats that are bypassing your existing controls. And this is a place where I kind of like to use the silly old school house analogy, right? We've got traditional capabilities in most MSSPs that are focused on watching your front door, your back door. MDR is much more focused on persistent surveillance inside your house, looking for the bad guys who got in, got past everything else. NDR vendors also do at least the first two steps of the response process for their customers, those being validating or confirming the threat, and then assessing the risk or severity. And the goal here is to really assist the customer in understanding how to remediate and with what urgency. First couple steps of any good response process. So now we know what MDR is. Back to the path that we can take to getting EDR implemented in our security program. First, we can obviously build it ourselves internally. And some of you may have ongoing projects here or upcoming projects. And if you do or you're probably looking at an array of things you need to implement it in order to do this effectively. To do it well, obviously you'll buy some EDR tooling. The goal there is to get visibility. You really need deep, low-level visibility into your endpoints. Obviously, we love Carbon Black for that. You also need to figure out how to host the equipment required to do that data collection. So whether that's a cloud-based solution or you're involving your infrastructure, engineering resources internally, there's some effort there. Nothing you're not used to from other products, but some effort that goes into that. Obviously, you're going to want to integrate the data produced into your existing workflow somehow. This may be as simple as just shipping all alerts into your ticket tracking system or into your SIM. Could be much more complex. Could require some custom SIM integration, a bunch of orchestration and automation. Bottom line is that you're going to need some engineering resources to get it done. One thing I've noticed recently is that there's a big trend kind of across the industry of bringing software developers onto security teams. As a software developer myself, I can tell you with some certainty that managing developers can be painful as they're kind of whiny and can be tricky to motivate. But to implement your security program right, it's going to require some folks who can build custom code, pull data together, optimize the workflow of your analysts doing the work. You need to find a way to create and continuously update the detection rules and algorithms required to surface those potential threats, right? So some researchers, et cetera. And of course, you're going to need a team of analysts who are going to pound through, in EDR's case, especially a lot of false positives. Remember, we said earlier, most bad activity looks a lot like good activity. So most of what they're going to be looking at will not be a threat, and so they're having to do those first couple steps that I mentioned of the response process over and over and over again. And that's a capability you have to add to your team. So since I work for an MDR vendor, you're probably sitting there thinking, well, yeah, of course, this guy is going to make it sound really hard to do. And well, yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. But we fully support the fact that doing it internally is the right decision for a lot of companies. And if that's the case for you, we're happy to tell you exactly how we built our capability, kind of help you through implementing yours. Happy to help. We don't even have a way to sell consulting, so that's all free. Definitely reach out to us if you're interested in that. Moving forward, the next way we can get EDR into our program through an MDR vendor. So we just talked about kind of how Gartner's defining this and what the goals are. The idea here is really that we're outsourcing everything except the hands-on remediation. One thing I'll caution you to be a little bit wary of MDR vendors that say they're taking remediation off your hands. And the question you really need to ask yourself there is, do you really expect them to know your business well enough to know when it's okay to shut off your domain controller, right? I know that's a little bit of an extreme example, but there's a lot of small decisions that go into remediation, and you need to take that into account. Do you want to make those decisions, or are you comfortable with somebody outsourced making those decisions? The big benefit of MDR here is that you're getting a really mature detection and response process and capability. You're leveraging resources that are pretty hard to hire and keep without going through the pain and the dollars to build it internally. So as Rick said, opportunity to really leapfrog and jump over a couple years potentially of effort. The last option here is to try and get this capability through an MSSP. We all know and love MSSPs, and obviously they serve their purpose. In 2016, right, who wants to manage their own hardware? I don't. Most MSSPs are happy to use whatever you've got. So if they throw logs and things from basically whatever you've got into their tools and do something with it. Plus, they have mature processes for escalation of threats. They've got the 24/7 phone numbers you can call, the ability for you to bring you other services that you might need in some scenarios like IR, breach response, or forensics. The way I think about MSSPs is as kind of a thin layer that you can buy for a reasonable price to help check compliance boxes, help implement basic kind of traditional capability, as well as manage those devices. Many of them have started offering services that sound like managed detection and response. In reality, I think you need to take a hard look at that and decide, are they really doing that, or are they kind of selling you a similar thing to what they've been selling in a lot of other areas? Device management, make sure the device is on, and potentially do some log management correlation. And we'll get into this a little bit more later. All right, so why would companies, or why are companies outsourcing some of their endpoint detection and response? Why is there such a thing as Red Canary? Why are we in business? Here are some of the reasons that we see on a regular basis. One pretty common one, company may have tried to build it out, and then as they got into that project, realized that it's really a difficult capability to build, even in pretty mature security organizations. Almost universally, adding an EDR capability to a security program requires the hiring of at least one person. Most people in information security that I know these days switch jobs about every 18 months. So it can be a pretty big challenge to get and keep the talent required to do it well. You may not have realized going in that EDR was much more than a tool, and now you may not have the budget to complete the project. You may have some tools running, but don't have a way to kind of finish it off. Or you may have EDR on the roadmap with a long implementation schedule, and outsourcing gives you an ability to jump over a lot of that schedule and get to a mature capability, as Rick was mentioning earlier. So those are some of the reasons why you might do that.
Real quick
Please do, Rick.
As well, Chris. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think we kind of do as an industry a little bit of a bad job, right? We build capabilities with the current staff that we have, and it relies on the staff that we have, right? So say I hired an entire EDR team, spent 2 or 3 years, building that capability, training those folks, and then they all leave, right? Or the leader of the program, the CISO, decides to take a new gig. That continuity in your program is gone away, right? So I think one of the valuable things of looking at partners in this area is to be able to maintain the capabilities that were built for an organization, regardless of the staff that's in place, right? So I think Chris alluded to it. Lots of us are switching jobs pretty rapidly right now, and that ability to go back to your business and say, look, I've created this process, I've partnered with these folks, and this capability is going to live well beyond the staff that's in place now. I think it's great assurance for your business partners as you're building the program. So I like to really harp on that for folks that business continuity and security is real, and we need to do something about that. So.
Awesome, Rick. Thanks. Great point. So now let's dive in a little bit deeper on exactly what goes into a strong EDR capability. And let's talk about kind of 3 areas required to do it well, the old school technology, expertise, and process, right? The kind of the holy trinity of everything in security. And I don't know, you're probably sick of hearing vendors talk about that as much as I am. But let's dive in kind of in each area and figure out, what do you have to do in order to make EDR really valuable in your environment. On the technology side, obviously you start with implementing a way to get visibility on your endpoints. Carbon Black's great for that. From visibility, you can start to craft detection capabilities to surface potential threats. A lot of different ways to do this. Obviously, if you're a Carbon Black user or know much about the product, they've got really good capabilities to implement watch lists and threat intelligence feeds, things like that. So you can go from kind of basic threat intel and rule-based up through behavior analytics, behavior analysis, analytics, long-term anomaly detection, and over time you build up these capabilities and kind of hone your coverage, expand your coverage and tune, because what you'll find as you build out that detection capability is sometimes you'll find a threat and say, man, if we just looked for this type of PowerShell invocation. You put that detection rule in, and it gives you a million false positives, and you have to look at that and say, okay, how can we tune this back so that it's not so noisy? Kind of a continuous process. And then once you're surfacing your potential threats, you need a way to manage them and make them consumable by your analyst. Big piece of that, using automation orchestration to pull the right contextual information from a variety of sources. So your analysts are fast, accurate, they have all the context. That makes a huge difference in terms of how much your program is going to cost you. You knew machine learning would make an appearance somewhere in here. It's a huge part of how you get better over time at modeling potential threats and being a little bit more predictive. Really powerful technique, and you need that as well. We also need some sophisticated ways to do suppression of events automatically. What we want to avoid is having our analysts investigate the same false positives over and over and over again every day. Right? So we need some means of safely suppressing events. And honestly, the Red Canary suppression engine is one of the most complex pieces of software that we have. Really complicated, allows us to do suppression at very high levels and at very, very granular levels. Really important for keeping noise out of our analyst space. Moving on to the kind of expertise or people section, it really takes more than just security folks to get this job done. We're going to need some architects to define the product, define the interconnections, look at the data, understand how we correlate and how we make this work. We need software engineers, like I mentioned earlier, to build out that custom logic, that integrations, things like that. Obviously, someone's got to handle the intel, the research, staying up to date on the latest tactics and trends, looking at where we're missing things and how we can fill those gaps without killing the analysts. We need analysts, right? Easy ones who can take potential threats and investigate them. One thing we see pretty commonly is folks who've been kind of ingrained in doing network-based analysis can have kind of a tricky time transitioning and looking at endpoint data, just because it requires a little bit different background in terms of understanding how OSs work and things like that at a pretty low level. Data scientists, very useful in a whole bunch of ways, including, you guessed it, machine learning. And we need infrastructure and operations folks. We're going to build out a whole bunch of capability here, a whole lot of machinery. We've got to have the right people in place who can really make that hum and make sure it stays running. Because what we're talking about here is really big data type applications. We're not talking about something simple and stays up all day on its own. There's a lot of effort in just making sure that everything stays humming and that we're getting all the data that we need to monitor our environment. The final category here, process. If you have strong processes for other types of data or other types, your response processes are strong, this can give you a leg up, but you do still have some work to do here. You're going to have to define, alerting and notification processes, so alerts are handled in a timely fashion. We need to figure out how we're going to triage events and do investigation. Like I said, analysts are a little bit different in this space. It's not as cut and dried sometimes as on the network, and we have to define kind of how they do that. For instance, the Red Canary SOC, they use a guilty until proven innocent philosophy as really the basis for their investigation process, and everything gets built upon that. If we do have confirmed threats, we're going to need incident response processes internally and need to know how these interact with the rest of the process, how the handoff works, when we get IT involved, when we don't, how they interact with legal potentially, all kinds of things that need to be figured out. And God forbid we have an actual breach. How does EDR interact with the breach response process? How does customer notification work, and a lot of things like that. So a key component for doing all this well is really the feedback loops that you build in so that the results of your labor really make your future labors better and more effective. We talked a little bit about suppression earlier. That's kind of a key example. Another of the key things that Red Canary does is really analyzing the root cause when we do detect a threat that made it further than in the kill chain than we would have liked, and then figure out what we can do to upgrade our detection to make it faster. So for instance, if we missed the drop and we caught it when it was escalating privileges later or establishing persistence, we're going to do that analysis to say, well, why did we miss the drop? And then re-implement some new detection rules or detection capabilities so that we see it sooner. Pretty key part of the process. There's a lot of different feedback loops like that we need to put in place so that things keep getting better. And of course, we have to stay in compliance with audits and everything like that on the compliance side. That's important and always will be. So bottom line, there's a lot to do here. There's a lot to build. a lot of resources that you have to figure out if you can acquire or you can borrow from other parts of the organization, and it can be a time-consuming process. Just to pile on that, I'll throw a stat that I'm sure you're all also sick of hearing about at this point. We don't have enough security professionals. Right? We're way short today, and we'll be even shorter in the coming years. You can see the quote there from Frost and Sullivan and some of the Gartner quotes. The equal and opposite reaction of that shortage is that the outsource markets, including MDR and MSSPs, are really expected to boom over the next couple of years. So one caution there, beware that with this kind of explosion, there will be the emergence of some low-quality players. Don't be fooled. Make sure you understand exactly what you're getting and go from there. All right, so one question you might still be struggling with a little bit, really, what is the difference between MSSPs and EDR and MDR? And don't MSSPs do MDR? Let's dive into that a little bit. So back to this chart we were talking about with really the three options for getting to EDR. I like to think of MDR really as the detection and response capability that you would build internally if you had the time and the money and the resources. It's much more like that, right? It's coupled, it's the same thing. If you had the ability to do it, you would do it. MDR is the premium solution, and it's really made to take work off of your plate, function as part of your security team. Contrast that a little bit with MSSP, which will be able to supply you with some of the infrastructure, some of the tools, but really you're still going to be primarily responsible for building out the overall capability in your security program. In a way, the MSSP really just a small piece of a DIY approach, right? You aren't outsourcing your detection necessarily. You're outsourcing a lot of the infrastructure stuff. And obviously this can be a huge advantage, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. As Rick said, that can accelerate a lot of your efforts so you can get a lot of this stuff off your plate and you can focus on building the part of your program that you really want to. But that's really the difference. That's what an MSSP provides. You're building on top of the capabilities that they're hosting and providing to you. Managed detection and response is not a wide capability. It's a very narrow capability and very deep, specifically geared at delivering this capability to you. Last thing here on outsourcing, and really kind of another cautionary thing. It's really important to consider how your business works and knowing yourself before you go down the outsourcing route. You need to understand the way your business works, what each option really entails. So for instance, if you're defining a bunch of new processes to do EDR, what kind of overhead is there to documenting, maintaining them, things like that? How many people do you have the ability to hire? What kind of roles are you going to be able to fill based on where you are geographically or where you're able to hire these people? How does that fit in with the other parts of your roadmap, of your budget? Is your organization is your primary goal really to be compliant, or is your goal to really implement true security? Like key questions to ask yourself. And working with an MSSP might sound great because they'll do it all, and you'll really have the proverbial one throat to choke. And that might provide you some huge value, right? It may be the right answer for you to only use one managed solution rather than potentially an MSSP for some of your other capabilities in an MDR or something separate. So are you okay with multiple outsource vendors? A lot of questions to ask and kind of understand about yourself before you go out and try to select an outsourcing strategy. Rick, I'm curious if you have some strategy or stories around kind of planning and building out capabilities like this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, kind of going back to the earlier conversation, I mean, you really got to sit down and think about this stuff, right? Because, saying, hey, awesome, we're going to have a detection and response capability, which everyone should have, it just has cost trade-offs, right? And you may need to start that discussion now to go get budget in, a year, depending on your budget cycle, and really make the case to your executives and your management that this is why you need the capability, and here's the path that you're going to take, and then outlay the cost of it, right? Look at it over 3 years and say, well, look, if I have a recruiting problem today in security, and now I'm going to go specifically look for very talented individuals, those hiring cycles are going to take more time, and it's all going to drag out how long it takes you to mature in that capability. So I think with any capability, not just EDR, when you look at any of your capabilities in your program stack, you just really have to go back to what's the true cost, and then sell the value to your executives, right? And in some cases, you're not going to win in every battle. So I think, again, this approach that there's folks out there like Red Canary that are focused on this is a great help to a number of teams that are out there because, frankly, we're drowning in a lot of stuff. We're drowning in compliance. We're drowning in the management of our gear. We're drowning in new projects, right? Ripping and replacing old technologies with new technologies. And so I think, again, a thoughtful strategy around what are the tools, people, and process that you're going to bring in. And then I think the other thing I would say is not everybody's going to get it right, especially on the MSSP side of the house, because that's not an area that they focused on. They're building practices and capabilities to do the same thing your teams would. So as you can imagine, they have the same challenges, only their scale is much more massive than probably your team's dealing with, right? So partner with the vendor. Right, this is important. I think a lot of people think, hey, I went and got an MSSP, my alerts should just be handled. Hey, awesome, I went and partnered with Red Canary. And no, sit down with them on a regular basis, right, and use that as an opportunity to make everybody better, right? Help the vendors sharpen their knives, and then help your teams get smarter about what they do, their processes. And then I think when you have a true partnership with folks like Red Canary that can do that, now everybody's getting better, right? You're pushing them to be better, they're pushing you to be better, and you just sort of get that synergistic output.
Yeah, awesome, Rick. Yeah, thanks for explaining. I think your background kind of overlaps with what we see with a lot of folks, and I appreciate your explanation there. So let's jump kind of to wrap things up, and then we'll get into some of the good questions that have flowed in here. So first things first, you need EDR, right? Loud noises. Second thing, we talked about this, EDR is not a tool you can buy and stick in the corner. It's really a discipline or a capability that you build out within your program. We've harped on that a lot. You may want to consider outsourcing as a way to get EDR implemented and really get access to some great resources. And the last thing, and we harped on this as well, MDR vendors and MSSPs are not the same thing. It's important for you to kind of understand the differences there and ask, as Rick was saying, partner with your vendors, understand what they're going to provide to you and what they aren't. Really important piece of that equation. So thanks everybody for joining us. If you're interested in talking Red or kind of or you're going through implementation EDR internally, and definitely reach out to us through our website. I'd definitely love to chat with you. We'll have some time here for questions, so I'm going to go through what we've got here and bring some of them up, and Rick and I will do our best at it. So first question is, a lot of the attacks that we're trying to protect against require pretty specific, sometimes knowledge of the businesses themselves. So as an example, we see the Swift attacks. It's a pretty narrow niche attack and demands really good knowledge of the business and how it functions and that kind of thing. So Rick, curious from your perspective, when it comes to very specific targeted type things against specific sectors, what expectations should companies have for kind of outsourced providers?
Yeah, again, I mean, that's where the partnership comes in. Your team has the home field advantage, right? And I think we forget that a lot in security. I mean, the one thing we do have is we should understand what normal is in our environments. If you don't, you probably want to drive to that level of understanding, i.e., in a Swift-based network, understanding how those transactions occur, where the possible threat vectors are along those paths, and then being able to create effective monitoring for all of it is really what you're going to need to do, right? So start off by understanding what your normal is, and then you're able to do anomaly detection, right? And I think to what Chris brought up earlier, if you're sort of an outsider coming in, right, and I would say this is true of any partner, they're just going to alert on stuff until you actually sit down with them and say, well, look, here's why this was a false positive, and go through that tuning phase with the folks at Red Canary or other partners that you may have. That's how you're going to get to figure out and catch the anomalies, right? But if you sort of don't have an understanding of your environment, a baseline, and then in cases be able to normalize that environment, right? And so other technologies, right? And see Carbon Black has a number of them, are able to do that. They're able to look at your servers and say, look, our servers only do one thing. These are the only functions that they do. This is our only expectation out of that environment, when I see anything that differs from that, that's when I want a response alert, right? And I think to Chris's earlier point too, what did I expect my teams to be good at? Remediation and response, right? And so the moment we were alerted, I expected remediation and mean time to remediate to not take weeks or months, but literally take minutes or days, right? So I think that's a good effective metric to measure how well you are about catching the stuff and then actually remediating it, right? Because I've seen organizations, and this certainly happened to me when you're a little bit more immature in your programs, your mean time to remediate could take a year, right? I mean, you find a vulnerability on a web application, that web application's got to get rewritten, it goes to QA, blah, blah, the entire change management chain, and sometimes that takes too long. So looking at those other areas where you can shorten that stuff down is also good. But I think having a good normalization of your environment is where you start.
Yeah, awesome. Following on to that, one of my favorite things that one of our customers has told us is that they consider prevention really to just be detection with an action at the end of it, right? And the point being that we can't always control how long it takes us to find something because things are quiet and attackers are good. But once we find it, we ought to be able to get rid of it or remediate it pretty dang quick, unless we're in extreme cases like you mentioned with web applications. To tag on as well in kind of the way Red Canary handles those specific business cases, very much what Rick described, right? We want to partner with you guys, understand exactly what systems are doing what. We obviously have kind of our view of what's going on with the attacks, like the attacks against Swift networks, things like that. We have good sources of intelligence, but you guys are in the ISACs, things like that, and providing that information to us helps. Another question we had here is, it's not realistic to hire top-notch talent across all the expertise categories that I outlined. Or we have the mindset that it's not worth trying to build this internally if you can't get all those disciplines. I don't know that I'd go that extreme. I mean, obviously, I think if you can't get any of them, you're probably going to have to outsource all of it. But it's really just a decision that you need to make. Do you want to try and contract folks in to do some of it, bring in consultants, things like that? Are you able to kind of do parts of it through a variety of vendors? One of our goals really is to be the easiest solution in this space so that you can just drop it in, turn it on, deploy the sensor, and you're done. And so our value proposition is really, you can start doing this tomorrow, right, rather than trying to maybe piece together part of the equation. So no, I don't think I'm saying that you shouldn't even consider building it internally if you can't get everyone on the list that I described. But you need to consider how exactly you're going to accomplish those things because they all need to be done. Rick, anything to add on that point?
Yeah, again, a lot of this really just comes back to the resource issue that we have, right? So the good folks that probably have these skills, highly sought after, other organizations are going to throw money at them. There's vendors out there that are going to try to hire them, right? So I think good employee management is helpful when you want continuity in your operations. Are these folks working on interesting challenges? Are they growing their skill sets in these areas? And can you continue to sustain that over the course of 1 year, 2 years, 10 years? And so I think as looking at it from a CISO point of view, I think it's a blend of both. I want people on my staff that can get there, right? But not all of them are going to be there today. So in the meantime, I still have to do something about this problem. But I think this idea that the two teams can partner together and learn is really great because I've seen that a number of times with junior engineers and junior analysts. We're just having the conversations about the contextual alerting or, hey, this is what occurred in your environment, and driving to the understanding of what actually occurred makes them better, right? So it sharpens both sides. And so yeah, manage your people well, and I think give them a strategy and a plan to grow their skill sets, and then look at the other areas and say, okay, awesome. In the meantime, what am I going to do about this problem?
All right, very good. Another question that came in: don't most EDR tools have behavioral detection? Yeah, that's absolutely the trend that we're seeing. I think Carbon Black, with their recent acquisition of Confer, coming in as Carbon Black Defense, speaks to that as well. They're starting to amp up behavioral detection within their product as well. And most of the ones out there do have that. And that's exciting. It's great. I mean, we're excited to see that continue to evolve and get more and more behavioral detection coming into the tools themselves. The thing to realize is detection at the behavioral level, and I can kind of speak from a position of experience on this because this is what I've been, me and my team have been building for the last 3.5 years. When you do behavioral detection, it's very, very hard to get to the point where you're confident enough that you have 100% accuracy, right? Think about kind of the antivirus test case, right? Is you really can't afford to have any false negatives any false positives in antivirus, because then you're shutting off applications that users want to or are allowed to use, right? Legitimate applications. EDR and behavioral detection is kind of the other way around. You're guarding against false negatives, and so you're doing that at the expense of having no false positives. And so what that means is, even though many EDR tools are going to give you behavioral detection, and they may even do some anomaly detection and things like that, they're still adding work, significant work to your analyst's job, right? They're not net subtractors, they're adders, right? And that's the thing to keep your eye on, is that you still need some ability to kind of bang through those false positives and get to the real stuff. Rick, I don't know if you have anything to add kind of on Carbon Black strategy there, or behavioral detection kind of in general in the market.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's sort of why I alluded to, things like, throwing your servers in default deny mode and just allowing, good binaries to run on them, right? I mean, what does that do? Well, you've taken an area of your environment that you don't have to spend much time on, right? And so now your team can go focus on areas of higher risk. Maybe it's your employees that travel overseas to countries that may or may not have malware-laden systems, right? And so I think technologies like Carbon Black, defense, protect, and response really give your team the options to do that, and look at your strategy and say, okay, awesome, I have high risk in this area. I'm going to go lock these servers down. I want something that's a little easier than AV, that's going to have better prevention than antivirus currently. Awesome. And then I want response everywhere else, because we know ultimately prevention just doesn't rely on technology, right? So I think one of the interesting things, kind of, this is my first go at a security software vendor, and I think we have this unreasonable expectation that, hey, prevention's going to work, right? And it fails for a number of reasons. Maybe you're in the middle of rolling the project out, right? So you have a replace AV project, you're in the middle of throwing next gen AV in, and that's when the bad guys hit you, right? So you still need that response capability, because our programs are relying on people, and people do make mistakes, right? So sometimes gold images get a bad update or aren't updated, right? Sometimes configuration management tools fail. And so I think looking at endpoint detection and response is really, and the reason the market's grown is for all those reasons, right? The bad guys know we're vulnerable, but we're also running with 10 or 20 different projects at once to curb some of these threat vectors. But yeah, how fast can you get there? You're gonna need a good detection and response capability in the meantime, right? And then I think the other thing that grows out of that is your team being able to put on the hat like the attackers and say, awesome, how would they get into our environment? And taking the Swift example, walking that through end to end and saying, well, how did this happen? What are the other points of weaknesses that this could occur, and these millions of dollars could fly out the window? And knowing those, just having your team trained on those is going to make them smarter, because then they're going to think like the attackers, and you're going to put in appropriate prevention and response. So yeah.
Very good, very good. Another question we got here: which EDR tools cover the most of the things on the chart with the technology, people, and process of EDR? It's a really good question. Obviously, we're big fans of Carbon Black, and we think it's very much the best at the visibility side and the response tooling piece and access to data. Very good at detection as well once you build that out. So obviously there's other players in the market. I would say from the process side, there's not a lot of coverage in terms of what the tools are going to give you there. And on the people side, unless you're talking about something that's got some additional people behind it, where there maybe is a managed hunting type capability, you're not covering much of the people aspect either. So to me, the tools are primarily, a part of the technology stack on the left side of that chart. Let's go. So if we had an estimate, how many FTEs should an organization dedicate to EDR? Rick, having been a CISO, you're probably in a better position to answer that question than I am.
So I'll take this one as it depends on the technology and process you have in place. And I hate to say that, and there's a reason that I came to work for Carbon Black, and one of the reasons is because of the way the technology works, right? And working and seeing other security teams that were out there that were able to do massive scale with this with few headcount. And I won't name all the customers, but sizes of environment. I mean, we have organizations that are out there doing this on hundreds of thousands of endpoints with 2 FTEs, right? And they're doing a really good job at it. So again, I think it depends on a little bit on the people that you have on your staff and how currently trained they are, and then it depends on the technology that you have, and really all of that comes down to process, right? Because if you have good process. And it's worked, you can start to automate that, you can start to orchestrate activities and doing prevention and containment stuff with other technologies in the stack. So I think the thing I'll say about that is ensure you understand the capabilities of the tools you're looking to bring in. I certainly think that Carbon Black checks almost all the check boxes that you would have from a weighted criteria perspective, but it's also important to think about the people where they are. How fast can they get trained on these tools? Is there curriculums available and to be trained on the tools? And I would say a big advantage Carbon Black has in that space is the number of actual users that we have on the product. I mean, we're the market leader, so I think we have 10,000 plus practitioners that are out there, and so it winds up generating this wealth of knowledge, which can then be exchanged through our community and our detection exchange and all of that stuff to empower the teams to grow. But yeah, it's going to depend on the technology. I mean, I can certainly say I've tried to do this. So go back years before EDR was a thing. I mean, we all knew we had to correlate this data, do some sort of hunting, and find bad. And it's a very large effort to do it. And so I think that's one of the reasons, like my boss, Ben Johnson, and company went off and wrote an awesome tool like Carbon Black, is because it didn't exist. And it certainly makes life on the response side so much easier. So yeah, that's sort of my pitch for our stuff, but definitely be thoughtful about building that capability.
Yeah, and I can add a few numbers here just in terms of the question on how many FTEs. So Red Canary today, we monitor about 150,000 endpoints. Our analyst staff is, or I guess, obviously we're building the scale a little bit, but we typically have about 4 people dedicated to doing that, to doing the analysis on the events that we're seeing coming in from those 150,000 endpoints. Our engineering team is between 4 and 6 people, depending on how many people are dedicated to building out specifically that capability. So can use some of those numbers. Another number I'll throw at you. We typically see a couple hundred events per day per 1,000 endpoints. So if you have a couple thousand endpoints, because of how we're dealing with the casting a really broad net and then bringing in a bunch of false positives that just need to be hidden away, think about that. Think about probably a couple hundred events a day that you need to have some way to look at per 1,000 endpoints and some way to suppress. So can add up really fast, and you need some way to get through that. You can kind of extrapolate that to how long does it take for an analyst to do the response and triage on those events, kind of build up numbers from there. Is Red Canary fully dependent on Carbon Black being deployed at the endpoints? Today, yes, we are. If I'm working with an MSSP for endpoint security, what are the biggest hires and tech investments you would suggest I make? Because you said that is more of a hybrid approach. Yeah, so I think if you've got an MSSP with existing endpoint security, doing existing management of your endpoint security, I think the biggest thing, and I think this is what Rick would say as well, analyze what the gaps in what they're doing and what their people and processes are doing for you, and then do just a gap assessment and understand what they aren't doing for you and use that to drive what hires you're going to go out and make. I don't know that there's necessarily a one-size-fits-all approach there. So another it depends answer, but feel free to reach out to me and I can hook you up with some guys on our side who might be able to understand your situation and help out on that specific question. And then the last question.
Yeah, real quick on that, just on that topic. I think this is hugely important, right? So you have an expectation of what a vendor is going to do for you, right? And maybe it starts off simple, and you say, look, I just want you to do all the patching on my firewalls. Like, I don't want to touch them. I want you to make some rule changes whenever I request a rule change, right? So that's sort of maybe the first 30 days of your engagement with a managed security provider, right? But then you're paying these folks money, so you're going to want them to do more, right? And so test them, right? A good friend of mine, Chris Nickerson, kind of coined the term purple teaming, right? So taking a red team and either your MSSP or your managed EDR folks and getting them on the same exercise so that while the pen testers are hitting you, you can understand where the gaps in their visibility lies. So sometimes maybe it's a matter of logs just didn't make it over, right? There's all kinds of things that break in those processes. So I think again, I like this idea that as a CISO or as somebody running a program or somebody out there that's partnered with folks, you have these teams of folks that I think we don't get together often enough and then give them the results. So I would literally have meetings with my MSSPs and say, hey, here's the result of our pen testing. These are things, based on my expectations of contracts and all of that stuff, you should have caught. Why weren't they caught? And let's walk the whole thing through, right? And yeah, they're going to be a little painful and awkward conversations when you have that because there was a failure, right? But the only way we learn is through failure. So push them to be better and give them the results, right? If your team has some advanced skills and they're looking at more advanced attacks that are out there, awesome. Get that information to your partners, right, so that they can understand that they need to protect against that too, right? So again, I think we all need to sharpen each other's knives, and it's a really good way to do it.
Great, Ray. Thanks for expanding on that. Last question we have here is just a specific, does Red Canary offer other managed services, or how does Red Canary work with MSSPs? We don't offer any other managed services. We're focused squarely on doing managed detection and response, specifically managed endpoint detection and response. We work with lots of customers that have MSSPs who do a lot of other things for them, and we have a variety of integrations there that we end up working on. A lot of times our confirmed alerts will end up going over to the MSSPs, things like that. So it kind of depends on the arrangement and what the MSSP is providing, but that's kind of how we work with that. All right, I think that's kind of the end of the questions here. So wrap this up. We'll follow up there. This session will be recorded, and we can go ahead and send out a link so you can get to it later on. Any other questions that flow in here, we'll follow up kind of directly, or feel free to follow up with us. So thank you very much for coming, and have a wonderful day.